Guy came out. He was missing a few teeth and probably a few brain cells as well. A while back, probably around 3-4 years ago, I started getting the itch for an Integra Type R. When I was a little kid, my parents were big Honda people. I think my dad owned Hondas for a solid 20 or 25 years. My mom had a bunch of them as well. So I had a little bit of that Honda bug in me, and I just needed to scratch that itch. So once again, going on Craigslist, I was looking one night and I found a typical Craigslist ad for a junky Integra Type R. And it had one blurry photo. It had a terrible description full of grammatical mistakes and misspellings and a phone number. So, of course, I had to text because, a $4,000 Integra Type R with a presumably clean title was something that I just couldn't pass up. So I grabbed a friend of mine who was big into Hondas, and we went out to look at the car in Western New Jersey. And what we found was a car that was kind of sinking into the front yard of this double wide. It had a front end that looked like it had been sprayed with barbecue grill paint that had then flaked off, cheap carbon fiber hood, and smelled like mouse urine inside. Guy came out. He was missing a few teeth and probably a few brain cells as well. Seemed like he was on some substances. We went back and forth. I looked at the car, and surprisingly, the car, other than having a JDM front-end conversion, was all there. Obviously, VINs didn't match on the front. He'd explained to me that he'd bought the car from a Nissan dealership, who's the second owner, and the JDM front-end conversion came about because a truck had made a left over the front of the car and had destroyed the core support. So, being 2008, 2009, when the accident happened, it was just cheaper to just swap a JDM front end on it. But the engine, the transmission, the wheels, and everything from the firewall back was original. And the mouse nests were probably original too. So, as I said, the car was listed for $4,000, and my friend was trying to talk me out of it hard, and he succeeded. So I had offered the guy $3,000. He told me no. We went back and forth, and I ended up not buying the car and instantly regretted it. So my search continued on, and eventually I saw a black Integra GSR that looked pretty good in photos. So went and looked at it at 11:30 at night at a gas station in the pitch black, and the owner looked like he was straight out of Malibu's Most Wanted. Looked at the car, drove it. The owner used the term that every Honda owner is familiar with, which is, it cracks VTEC well. I think he had the car up for $3,500, either $3 or $35, and I ended up offering him $1,500 because I discovered that he was moving to Florida the next morning. Being a shrewd negotiator that somebody that looks like they were out of Malibu's Most Wanted is, we ended up settling right at the middle at $1,700 and drove the car home. On my drive home, I realized if the GSR is this good to drive on twisty back roads, how much better is a Type R? So, got the car home, cleaned it up, and surprisingly, the car cleaned up very well. Ended up putting it up for sale, and took about 3 weeks to a month to sell it. I'd put a couple thousand miles on it in the meantime as well. And the gentleman came from Western New Jersey, of all places, to buy it. As he was loading it up on the trailer, he said, I never asked you, why did you want to sell this car? And I said, I drove this and I really regretted not buying this Integra Type R that I had looked at out by you that was $4,000. And he stopped dead and went, was it at such and such town? Which I'm not going to tell anybody because the car is still there to this day. He stopped dead. He asked me where it was and I told him. And he said, that's my friend's car. He had apparently tried to buy it as well. And he went full boat to the $4,000 asking price. And at the last possible second, the owner's mom decided to loan him the money to get him out of a bind so that he would not sell his first car. So there went my GSR and my first Integra, and the search continued for a Type R. And me being, for lack of a better term, cheap, every time I'd find a Type R, I couldn't quite bring myself to spend the money, and then the values would go up, and then I would kick myself for not spending the money, and then wouldn't want to stretch to the higher amount, and then the process would repeat until I got to the point where they were already in the 20s. One night, talking to a friend of mine, he told me about how his friend had a yellow 2001 Type R, and he was the original owner. He'd actually leased it and then ended up buying it out, and the car had very low miles. The gentleman ended up moving down to Florida. His dad still lived up here, and he kept it in storage up here. So I told my friend, well, if he ever wants to sell it, give me a call. And sure enough, my phone rang 2 weeks later. So I ended up going to look at the car, and it was in pretty rough shape. It had been sitting next to a concrete mixer for the better part of 10 years, which the issue with that is that you use limestone in concrete, and limestone eats through paint. So it ended up having this kind of splatter effect down the one side of the car. Somebody had put a turbo kit on it. He told me he'd ran it at about 5 PSI. Never really ran it at the track or anything once he did the turbo kit. But needless to say, it had it on there. It had 15 or 20-year-old tires on it. It had the original timing belt on it. But the car ran and drove. We ended up negotiating, and I took the car home. And thanks again to AAA for towing the car home for free for me, which I actually didn't get the car towed directly home. I had the tow truck driver drop it a couple blocks away from my house, waited until he disappeared, jumped it, and then drove it to my house because, as we all know, Integra Type Rs are hot commodities on the stolen car market. So I ended up getting the car. I got a pile of parts that was about 3 feet by 3 feet. And the gentleman who sold me the car told me that everything was there. And while you'd expect that getting a pile of parts and somebody saying, oh yeah, everything's there, that there would be a ton of missing stuff, there was one missing air conditioner line. That was it. Every bolt went right back into place. Turbo kit came off. The car was tuned with an early Apexi VTEC air fuel controller, which was a very early piggyback system. Pulled it off, put the original injectors back in, put a timing belt on it, water pump, all that, and car fired right up and ran fantastic. I ended up driving the car about 3,000 miles. Doug DeMuro actually came to my house and reviewed the car, and it is the Integra Type R that is in his video. It's just a really fun car to drive. But I watched the values climb, and to me, it got to the point where it was fun, but it wasn't the price tag fun. So ended up putting it on Bring a Trailer, made some money on it, and scratched that Integra Type R itch. It was a fun car. It's kind of, the best way I can describe it is it's like a mini Porsche GT3. And I'm sure the internet will go nuts about me saying that. But if you look at how the car was built, it's built like a homologation car. It's totally seam welded. It's got no sound deadening in it whatsoever. The suspension's totally different. Brakes are different. The engine's very different. Even though it's that same 1.8 liter VTEC, the head's hand built. I know it's different compression, and it makes great power for what it is. And it revs to the moon. Fantastic shifter too. The big drawback with the car is that I live in northern New Jersey where it's very densely populated. And to get to good roads, I have to drive about 40, 50 miles north up to Bear Mountain. The big issue with the car is that it is horrible on the highway. I mean, you cannot imagine how bad it is. Because when you're doing 75 miles an hour, it's turning about 4,500 RPMs, and there's zero sound deadening. So you're going along, and the car is going, and after about 10 minutes, you feel like your head wants to explode. So it just didn't work for me. The other big thing is the air conditioning saps about 100 horsepower out of the 180 or 190 that it originally had. So if you have the air conditioning on and you're trying to go up a hill, the car feels like it does not want to go anywhere. So you essentially have to drive the car around town in the summertime, windows down, and as soon as you get on the highway and you're cruising, turn the AC on. It just didn't work for me, but it was a really fun car.